Hello comrades, and this time I would like to talk about Marx's labor theory of value. It's something that a bunch of people have asked me to talk about, so I will give it a shot. I don't have a script for this, but I will do my best. It's a kind of a complicated and big topic, but I will try to explain it. And I guess this is it. It would be good to compare the Marxist labor theory of value and the labor theory of value that Marx created with I think it would be good to compare that with the kind of neoliberal bourgeois right-wing understanding of economics and all that stuff. So, labor theory of value. Well, first of all, let's get one thing straight. Marx didn't invent the labor theory of value, because there's a bunch of right-wingers and a bunch of capitalists who say, oh, the labor theory of value is idiotic, it's something that Marx invented, and they actually give very specific critiques to it. And it's kind of funny, because usually right-wingers, they don't criticize Marx very specifically, but when it comes to labor theory of value, they give very specific critiques, and they always say that what if the labor isn't useful? That's basically what they'll say, and that is a valid criticism. However, it's not a valid criticism against Marx, because, as I said, Marx did not invent the labor theory of value. He invented his own version of it, but the guy who actually invented the labor theory of value is Adam Smith, who is known as the, father of capitalism. So it's actually Adam Smith who invented the labor theory of value, and all the other major economists like Ricardo and all those people, they all had their own labor theory of value at the time. So Marx wasn't the only one, but Marx had the best labor theory of value, because Adam Smith's labor theory of value didn't actually say that the labor had to be useful in any specific way. He didn't really define that. He just said that labor creates value. Now, the right-wingers, they will point out, well, what if the labor is useless? Does it still create value? What if you are just waving your arms around for hours and hours doing this labor, even though it's creating nothing? Or what if you're just making like a boat or something, and you're just polishing it for hours and hours and hours and hours, and you're making this one boat for weeks and months and years? Shouldn't the boat be like incredibly valuable? Well, maybe according to Adam Smith, but not according to Marx. So let's get that right, dealt with right off the bat. That's not an argument against Marxism. That's an argument against Adam Smith. So stop with that bullshit. So, what exactly is the labor theory of value? Well, obviously it's the idea that it's labor that creates value. The modern neoliberal capitalist understanding is that value is something subjective. That's what they love to say. They like to use these Robinson Crusoe kinda deserted island type examples. They say, oh, if there's two people on a deserted island, and one of them has milk and the other one has sandwiches, and you're both thirsty and both hungry, but only one of you has drink and one of you has food, so you switch them with each other, you trade, you barter. You're somehow now both richer, because they say that a hungry man will value food more than a man who is not hungry. And in that sense, value is subjective. So therefore, they both, when they trade, they both get supposedly richer. Well, that never actually really. I mean that's nonsense. When you trade, you don't both get richer. This implies that trade creates value. Well, how the hell does trade create value? I mean, if there's two guys, you can trade the things that you have like all day long, but nothing new is being created. All that's happening is that the value is being transferred from one person to another and maybe back again, but that's all that's happening. Trade doesn't create value. It might create subjective fulfillment of your needs, but it's not value. And Marx actually defined that very well, because he said that there's different kinds of value. There's exchange value, and there's use value, and then there's just value. But we will get into that in a moment. So if value is not created in trade, because it obviously isn't. I mean, nothing happens when you trade. All that's happening is goods are being transferred. Nothing is being created. So value is not created by trade. So what could possibly create all this value then? Well, it should be obvious that it's labor, it's productive work that creates all value. Everything around us that we have is created by labor. It's not created by trading, it's created by work. Now, granted, trade is an important element of modern economy, but without labor, there would be nothing. So there's different kinds of value. So there's just plain value, then there's exchange value, and then there's use value. Now, what exactly is use value? Use value means that something has to be useful, basically, because in order for someone to want to produce something, and this keep in mind that this all applies to capitalism only. It doesn't apply to communism. The so-called law of value does not function anymore in communism. So this is all in relation to capitalism. So in capitalism, in order for something to be produced, someone needs to want it. Someone needs to have a use for it, in order for them to buy it. Therefore, it has to have a certain use value. If it's not useful at all, like if there's some product that nobody wants, it doesn't even have to be like what you would generally perceive as useful. Like, for example, a shovel is useful, you can dig with it. But even something like a video game or a piece of jewelry, which is not necessarily, perceived as something very useful, it's something that people want. The use of a video game is to give entertainment, enjoyment. The use of jewelry or fancy clothes is to give enjoyment to the people who have them. So they still have, that's their use. So they have a use of some kind, even if it is kind of trivial and stupid, but it's still a use. So everything has to have a use, otherwise nobody would be making them. So that's use value. So when right-wingers say that, a hungry man values food more highly than a man who is not hungry, they're talking about use value, so they're confusing two different things. Because obviously, it's only your perception of the thing that changes. Because, like, if there's a bowl of soup, it doesn't matter how hungry you are, the soup is still just the soup. Nothing is happening in the soup, or whatever kind of food, or whatever kind of product. The product is the same. Your perception does not change the product, at least according to materialism. It's a very idealist notion that your perception somehow changes the value of the thing. Your perception doesn't change the value. The value stays the same. Your perception is the use value. So, okay, if you don't have any use for a hammer, then that doesn't affect the hammer. The hammer is still just the way it used to be. But if you really, really need a hammer, then you are maybe willing to pay more for it, because the hammer has a high use value for you. So that's what use value is. Now, exchange value means, so let's recap. So use value is how useful it is to you specifically, and value is the actual value of the thing. So those are not the same thing, just keep that in mind, that's important to understand. So then exchange value is basically the price, but not exactly. It's exchange value is the relation of how much of another commodity some commodity is worth. So, for example, chair can be worth 2 hamburgers. That would be an exchange value. Now, usually we think about these things in terms of money price, and that's one of the things that complicates this, because capitalism functions around money, and capitalist ideology gives money this special magical power that money is somehow something incredible, something spectacular, something special, something unique. People do crazy things because of money. Money is fetishized in capitalism. Even though money is just another commodity, money is like any other commodity. Marx called money the universal equivalent because money is the commodity which function is to facilitate trade. It's much more convenient to trade with money than to barter, trade one commodity for another commodity, trade, animal hides for, iron swords. It's much more convenient to trade things for money. So money is the commodity that is used for trade, and it's the universal equivalent. But that doesn't mean that the exchange value, the money price, is not the actual value. Because right-wingers and right-wing ideology confuses all these separate things, all these three distinct, different, separate things, and uses them as the same. They confuse use value with value, and not only that, they confuse the money price with value. So they say, oh, you have a severe need for food, so the food has a high usefulness for you, therefore its price is, high. You are willing to pay a lot for it. Where in reality what's happening is, and they say that's value. The value is increasing all the time. As you get hungrier, the value increases, which makes absolutely no sense. Nothing is being added to the food. The customer is just getting more hungrier. So all that's happening is no value is being created. All that's happening is the customer is being coerced. The customer is being scammed and coerced, but no value is being created. So it is important to realize that use value is why people choose to get certain commodities, and exchange value is the price that they will pay for it. But products are often sold above their value. The exchange value is often higher than the actual value, but sometimes it's actually lower. So this is where supply and demand come in, because right-wing ideology says that, all that matters is supply and demand. Value is subjective, it's based on subjective desires, and it's based off of supply and demand. They say that if there's scarcity, then the value somehow increases, which makes absolutely no sense. Again, nothing is being created. The product is just scarce. Like, imagine you have a bottle of water, and there's one consumer for the bottle of water. But imagine there's now two people who want the bottle of water. According to right-wing ideology, the value of the water has just doubled. Even though the water has not changed one bit. The water is still exactly the way it used to be. That's total metaphysics, that's total idealism. That's not based on material reality. So scarcity does not increase value. Value is created by productive labor. Scarcity doesn't create value. Trade doesn't create value. None of these things create value. Labor is the only thing that creates value. I know I'm repeating myself, but I'm trying to be as clear as possible. So, supply and demand explain how something can be sold above its value because of scarcity, or it's sold below its actual value because of overproduction, or basically overproduction. If demand drops too much, then nobody wants to buy the products, but the capitalist will try to sell them anyway to minimize his losses, so he will sell them below their value at a loss rather than not sell them at all. So that's how stuff gets sold. If there's too much supply, then the value doesn't change. If there's too much demand, the value still doesn't change, but the exchange value does. So if there's too much supply, the price will drop typically, and if there's too much demand, then the price will typically skyrocket. So supply and demand explain how things are sold below or above their actual value. But it's important to realize that assuming that supply and demand are at an equilibrium, which doesn't really ever happen in capitalism, but assuming it did, then what would happen? supply and demand would suddenly lose all meaning. They would lose their ability to explain where value comes from. Because if there's no scarcity, but there's no overabundance of this product, but it still has a value, it still has a certain price even, where does all that come from? It cannot come from supply and demand anymore. And it comes from labor. It comes from the labor theory of value. So the labor theory of value doesn't actually reject supply and demand. Supply and demand is actually one part of the labor theory of value, or at least one part of the Marxist understanding of economics. Now, there is a big contradiction between use value and exchange value, because in capitalism, things are not meant for, they're not made for use directly. Even though products need to have a use, they need to be useful to someone, otherwise nobody would buy them. But they're not directly meant for use, they're made for sale, they're made for trade. The capitalist doesn't make them so that he or someone else can use them. The capitalist makes them, or his workers make them. But anyway, the capitalist manufactures things so he can sell them for money. Whereas in communism, in a communist society and planned economy, products would be made for use specifically. They could even be handed out for free because they're meant for use. Also in feudalism and in more primitive societies where people would make their own tools and farm food for themselves and their families, they would be doing that for use, not for sale. But in capitalism, that is, those things are separated from each other, and there's a contradiction between exchange and use. There's a whole bunch of people who would like to use water, but they can't buy it, so they can't get water. There's a whole bunch of people who would like to live in a house, and there's even empty houses, but they don't have money. So, the use and the user doesn't meet, the exchange. Now, let's talk about exploitation and surplus value. We've established that value is created by work, by labor. It should be fairly obvious, unless you're a total idealist or believe in some sort of alchemy where things change as they get scarce or whatever, or things change as your perception of them changes. Because the basis of materialism is that the outside world is real. Your perception of the outside world doesn't change the outside world. But the basis of idealism is that the only thing that's real is your consciousness, and your consciousness perceives the outside world and thus creates it and makes it real. So the only way the outside world is real is through your perception of it, and therefore your perception of the outside world, when it changes, it also changes the world around you. So that's the idealist explanation of the world. But anyway, so let's talk about surplus value. So when somebody works for a capitalist, let's say they work 12 hours a day, just as an example. Let's say that during 6 hours they produce, one value, whatever that means, but let's say they make one value. And they work 12 hours, so they actually, during that 12-hour day, they make 2 value. Now the capitalist pays them a wage. Now let's assume the wage is 1 value. He works 6 hours, he gets the wage, then he works another 6 hours basically for free. So he gets 1 value, and the capitalist gets another one value. The worker is actually creating 2 value, but he's only getting 1. His wage is 1 value, but the total value of his product is 2 value. So that extra value that he makes, that he himself does not get, is called surplus value. And that's what the capitalist gets. And usually, it could be that he makes 10 value, he gets 1, the capitalist gets 9. It could be he makes 10, he gets 8, the capitalist gets 2. It doesn't really matter how much he gets, how much the capitalist gets, but simply the fact that he does not get the value of his work in its entirety is called exploitation. That's exploitation in the capitalist sense. Capitalist exploitation. And actually the thing that originally got me interested in Marxism was the idea that, to me, it just doesn't make sense that simply because you own capital, like if you're a factory owner, and you or if you own stocks, let's say you own stocks in a company, that you get money simply for owning those stocks. You don't have to do anything, you just own them and you get money. That just doesn't make any sense to me. Somebody actually works and produces the value, and then someone else sells those products and they get money, and you get a cut of that money because you own stocks. You, like, the owner of those stocks does not serve any purpose in the company. I didn't originally even know that was socialist. I just thought that that's just, you know, something. But yeah, somebody told me, like, you know, wouldn't it make more sense if the workers just got all that, you know, value? Because, like, everybody, the workers could have higher wages if they just got rid of this parasite who was leeching off the value, who was just owning the stocks and getting a giant cut of their value. And I was like, yeah, that would make sense. Now only later I actually learned that that's socialism, but that the workers own their own means of production and get the value of their labor. Now a whole different topic would be how that would happen in socialism or communism. So I'm just gonna briefly go over that. Obviously, there's no strict blueprint of what socialism actually looks like. Nobody really knows. You can debate about what is socialism, what is not socialism. Especially when it comes to communism, since communism has arguably never existed, and I don't think it has. There's been socialism, but not communism, because communism is the highest stage of socialism, the final stage of socialism. So that has never existed. So it's kinda, you know, nobody really knows what communism exactly looks like, but we have some ideas about it. Basically, in capitalism, the workers are exploited. There's wage labor in the capitalist sense, which means the workers are paid a wage, and the wage is always less than the value that they actually make. So the capitalist steals the surplus value and just gives a meager wage, which is less than the value, and he pockets the surplus value himself. Now in socialism, it's pretty similar in the sense that people, at least in the lower stage of socialism, for example in the Soviet Union, people would still work and they would get a wage, and there would be a profit, there would be a surplus value, but instead of the surplus value going to some capitalist, it actually goes to the society as a whole, because it's not actually possible to not have any surplus, because you at least need some surplus to keep the factory running, to repair machines, to invest in new machines, to expand production perhaps, and also to run the government, build infrastructure, and all that stuff. You would need some surplus, but it's not going to some capitalist, it's going to the society as a whole, and it's benefiting the workers indirectly. So the workers are getting the majority of the value in their wage, and then they are getting the rest of the value indirectly through the society as a whole. So that's important to realize, because the term wage labor implies that it's just wage labor, that it's just labor where you get a wage. It's not really that. When Marx talks about wage labor, he talks about it in the capitalist sense. So even though in the Soviet Union there was wages, it wasn't wage labor in the capitalist sense, because it wasn't exploitative. I recommend you read The Economic Problems of Socialism in the USSR by Stalin. That talks about specifically this issue, if you're interested in that. But then in communism, how this would work is, because in communism there's no more, at least in the highest phase of communism, there's no more money even, so there's no more wages. So people work according to, like we've all heard, work according to your ability, and receive, you know, payment in accordance to your needs. Well, in socialism, it's people work according to their ability, and they are rewarded according to their work. So you get a wage depending on how much you work. But in communism, it's according to your ability, according to your need. So people work according to their own abilities, and they receive products and things they need depending on their needs. So what that actually means in actual fact, what that actually means in practice, is that products are basically free. You don't have to pay for products. You can just go to the store and get stuff. Now, that sounds very strange, but basically that just implies that there's no rationing. Because in capitalism, like we've all heard that in socialism there's rationing. Like in Cuba, certain things are rationed. You can get food really cheap. You can get medical care for free. You can get certain things basically for free, but they're rationed. So you can get like a certain amount of baby diapers and milk for free. You can't get an infinite supply, but you can get a certain amount for free. You can get clothes and food for below their value, and all kinds of stuff like that. But then certain things like alcohol is priced above its value. So there's certain kinds of rationing like that. But in capitalism there's also rationing. It's just the rationing happens with price. People who can afford to buy things will buy them, and people who can't afford to buy them can't get them. And if everybody has money and there's a limited supply, then the scarcity is just going to increase the price. So that's the way capitalism rations products. So, it's stupid to think that there's no rationing in capitalism. There's rationing in both systems, just happens different ways. But in communism, the idea is that there's basically no rationing at all. The only way communism becomes possible is when there's like a superabundance of products, and we basically already have that in modern industrial countries. It's just that because there's tremendous waste in capitalism. Like half the world's food is thrown away. There's like half the shit that is produced is made deliberately so that it breaks easily. Everybody needs to get a new computer every 2 years. Everybody needs to get a new phone every 1 year, every 2 years. New TV every couple of years. New cars. Like, all that shit. We could make it so that it lasts forever. But we don't. Instead, it's made so that it breaks really easily, or it just gets old and you need to get another one. Anyway, so in communism, there's no surplus value anymore. The law of value doesn't apply anymore. It doesn't work anymore. There's no commodity production. What is commodity production? Commodity production means the making of products for sale. But in communism, they're not sold anymore. They're just given to people for free. So there's no commodity production anymore. So there's no law of value. There's no surplus value. But what is there? There is surplus product. Assuming someone is let's say they're a farmer. They're a collective farmer. They farm and they produce 1,000 kilograms of sugar, let's say, and let's say in a month. And in that month, they themselves use, let's say they use 1 kilogram of sugar themselves. There is a 999 kilogram surplus product. So that's what surplus product is. And let's say someone works in a mine. How much, like if they mine iron, how much iron are they themselves going to use in the form of various products in 1 month? Let's say, I don't know, 10 kilograms. And during that time they might mine several tons of iron. So again, that's a huge surplus product. And if the surplus is great enough, if the productivity is great enough, then the surplus is so much that everybody can just enjoy the surplus and there's enough. But that only works if productivity is high and all that. Now obviously there will be a transition to that, and the transition would be that first you get rid of money but you have rationing. So you just make sure that people don't take ludicrous amounts of stuff from the store. But eventually they will learn that why would you even do that? Why would you, if you go to the store and you see there's a PlayStation, why would you take 20 PlayStations? Why would you do that? Because you can't sell them. Nobody would buy them because you can get them free from the store. There's no reason to hoard them. You're not going to use them yourself. Like, why would you? And somebody comes visit your house, they see you have 20 PlayStations, they're just gonna say like, what kind of an asshole are you? Why do you have those? You don't need them. So eventually people would not do that anymore. They would just take what they need, as is implied in the the saying, from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. They would just take what they can reasonably consume. And if productivity is high enough, people can't possibly consume as much as is being produced in form of surplus product. And that's how communism would work. But of course that's like in the very distant future. Productivity these days is already so fucking high that especially if all the third world countries had the same amount of productive forces as the Western world, then we would have so much crap. There would be like, we would live in superabundance, and basically we already do. There's just so much waste that you get my point. And I've been going on for long enough, I think. But it's a big topic, a lot of things to discuss. If you have any questions, please ask them, and I will try to answer as best I can. I will see you guys next time with another video, another topic. Red salute.